Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we come together to learn more about using Azure Data Studio with Python for machine learning. My name is Hassan Mohsini. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry-leading ideas and technology from Microsoft partners and open source community. It's also home to the Microsoft for Startups program, with a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events. There's something for everyone. Check out our calendar of events on meetup.com and join our coming sessions. Our speaker today is Cheryl Adams. Cheryl is a senior content developer, SQL ML services at Microsoft, co-author of Hadoop Professional, Sr.Data architect, MSSQL and Google Cloud, contributing writer for AWS Redshift versus Tableau, and a tech evangelist. She's a storyteller and an advocate for wellness, mental health, and using technology for meaningful purposes. Feel free to ask questions during today's session. We will have regular stops to answer your questions, and also feel free to connect with us on socials and tag us on Reactor Abu Dhabi and MSFT Reactor on Twitter. And also make sure you adjust the playback settings to select the highest quality for the best experience, since we'll be using the different coding and terminal and of course the studio. So you'll need to adjust that from the settings tab, and also feel free to send us some questions. Keep the Q&A tab where I will be sharing some links and resources relating to today's session. And with all that said, I will hand over the mic to our speaker to start the session.
Thank you so much for that intro, and thank you for joining me today as we begin our discussion on Python and machine learning. I'm going to start and bring up my slide presentation, and then we'll begin. So today we're discussing Azure Data Studio with Python for machine learning. I want to start by talking about our relationship with data. Are you an analyst, developer, DBA, architect, or data scientist? Your introduction to data likely consisted of flat files, arrays, or tables. Perhaps you started looking at data through Excel and eventually moved to relational database, such as SQL Server, for larger table-based data. You've used SQL to join and select the contents of tables based on a where clause to filter and review a result set. You have relied on SQL Server Management Studio, perhaps, or another data-related tool to view data. If you are a developer, perhaps you've wrapped SQL in a code base like R or Python as part of some development process. In each one of these roles, you became what I would like to refer to as a data storyteller. You've used code and data-related tools to tell a story about data. If you are just starting out or wanting to learn, you picked a good place to start. So Microsoft defines machine learning this way. Machine learning uses algorithms to identify patterns in data, and those patterns are used to create a data model that can make predictions. With increased data and experience, the results of machine learning are more accurate. Today, we'll be working with machine learning services, a feature of SQL Server that gives you the ability to run both Python and R scripts with relational data. Microsoft has documented these setup instructions using machine learning to service multiple platforms. Let's review some of our objectives for today. Understanding your relationship with data, building a bridge to machine learning, intro to machine learning services. We'll also be reviewing data using machine learning services in SQL Server 2019. I will also share some links for a learning path for you to get even deeper into machine learning. I will also share with you the tools that I use to build my environment so that you can build your own. And at the end, we'll be able to answer some of your questions about this presentation. Machine learning services with SQL Server 2019 for Windows is the beginning of how we start working with data. One of the tools that I really enjoy using in this process was Azure Data Studios. Although time won't permit me to go through all of its features, this is a tool I highly recommend. You may be familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, which has some similar features. One of the primary features of Azure Data Studio is the ability to run code in a notebook. This is the best way I can describe this feature is to take you all the way back to high school or any school that you attended, where you maintain a notebook for each subject. The advantage of Azure Data Studio is that it has the ability to both maintain and execute code in more than one code base. So for example, you can create a notebook that contains a SQL script and then create another notebook and execute using Python without exiting the tool. Let's talk about a few of the terms that we'll be reviewing today. As you know, Python is an object-oriented high-level programming language. The Python package is a collection of modules, and when a module from an external package is required, it can be imported. Now, when we start talking about development terms or programming languages like Python and Python packaging, it sounds a bit overwhelming. And you may be sitting there thinking, I'm not a programmer or I don't know that language. One of the beautiful things about Python and its construction and development is that it is readable. The readability of Python allows you to really read through the code to see what it's doing. This is definitely an advantage that a lot of codes don't have. In regards to the packages that we'll be using today is Pandas. And Pandas is an interesting tool or package that allows you to manipulate the data using Python. Pandas also uses something called a data frame, which is a two-dimensional structure with columns. So think of it like a spreadsheet or even like a SQL table that retains data. If you're in a database field or using data as a database administrator, ODBC is probably familiar. So when we see Pi or PyODBC, this is the package used to connect to the SQL database. Normally, Python, PyODBC, and other packages are loaded into Python using a command line. In this case, the packages are loaded using Azure Data Studio as a tool. For my environment that I've pre-configured, I'm using SQL Server 2019 Machine Learning Services for Windows. I'm also using Azure Data Studio with the Python kernel installed. And there's also sample data available through Microsoft that I'm using for this demonstration. I'm going to switch screens now, and let's get started. What we are looking at right now is Azure Data Studio, and I want to just walk through and talk about some of the navigation that you can see here. Currently, what I have right now is a notebook which has a Python script in it. As you can see, the Python kernel is active, which means that's what this script is based on. But one of the great features that I mentioned in a prior slide was about the ability to load packages. So although my packages are already loaded for this demonstration, I wanted to show you how easy it is to add more. If you see the icon that my cursor is resting on, it says to manage packages. What we'll see once the screen loads is a list of packages that are currently installed. As you can see, not only does it show the package name, but it also shows the version. You can add new packages simply by selecting Add New and typing the package, and it installs. For this demonstration, we're using Pandas. As you can see, it's already installed here. And we're also using the ODBC connector, which is already installed here. This is quite simply one of the easiest ways that I've seen to load something for code usage, because you literally just have to know the name of the package and you add it and then it installs. So this is a great feature to use if you're getting comfortable with using Python. So once those features are added, you can then take your code base and place it into a notebook, selecting the appropriate kernel for that. So this is the script that we're using to demonstrate how to move data from a CVS or CSV file, rather, into a SQL database by a data frame. This particular code base that you're looking at here, as well as the sample data that's showing here, is available through Microsoft Docs, and I'll share that link later. The link actually walks you through the entire step-by-step on how to build this script, edit it for your environment. As you can see, I'm set up locally. The AdventureWorks is the sample data that Microsoft provides, and it's all here. All the information is here, and you'll just need to edit this based on your own environment. If we could, before we start, I want to take a step out from this and show you the actual documentation that we're using for this particular demonstration. So I'm going to bring that up as a share. This is the document that we're actually using for this demonstration, installing Python data frame into a SQL table. This takes you through all the steps that I've done today to do the same demonstration. As you can see, this is the CSV file that we're using in the demonstration, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to look at it in its completion. If you haven't visited Microsoft Docs or looked at any of these tutorials for quick starts, they're quite simple to use. You literally can select the copy button and obtain all the information in the correct formatting without being concerned about missing anything. The same as for the code. Here we can see the code is written here. In my environment, I've already had it set up with the server name, database, password, what have you. But you can, in your own environment, capture this code through the copy command and run it in your own environment. This information is available through Microsoft Docs, and there are other examples to use here as well. We're going to switch back to Azure Data Studio. And we're back to our page. This is the same code that I just showed you on the Microsoft Docs page. As you can see, it's edited to match up with what my environment is. This is the database that I'm connecting to here. You can see with the green active button on, which means that we are already connected. Now, one of the steps that was a part of this loading this data into a data frame was, where does the data go? A very important aspect if you're pulling data in from another resource. Are you appending it to an existing table or creating a new table? In this case, I created a SQL script. As you can see, separate notebook. This is now a SQL script, and it creates this table. I can also verify, which is a nice feature of the Azure Data Studio as I'm using it, that my table already exists, and here it is here. So that's the nice part, or a plus, I would say, with Azure Data Studio. When you run something in SQL, you can immediately see the results without switching tools, which I think is a plus if you're troubleshooting or managing any amount of data. So considering that that's already loaded, let's walk through and see what this script is doing. As I mentioned before, Python uses packages to perform certain functions. So here at the top, you see that we've already imported these two packages. And you're aware we went through managed packages, that's how they were loaded. Here, df, as I referred to earlier, is the data frame. And there's the data that we saw in the example on the Microsoft Docs. Here are some instructions about how to set up your connectivity for your server. Again, if you remember, that ODBC import feature is the feature that's needed to connect to the environment. If we scroll over just a moment, we can see the entire connect string. What's nice about the documentation that we have is that if you follow the documentation and cut and paste the script, you only have to do minor editing to get the script to work. So you see here, this is all the information that you need, and this is the connect string that it's using. So it's taking these variables that's here and putting it in this connect string. Now, here's something that may be familiar. If you are a data person, either DBA or data analyst, here is a SQL command. We're inserting that test data from that CSV file and putting it into that table that we created, department test. There's the row name, and group name. At this point, because we've already created the table and we saw that it was there, we just need to select this arrow. So we're going to select the arrow. And it runs fairly quickly. And what we can do at this point is we can go out into the database. And there's the table. And let's just right click and do a command to select the data that's there. And there's all the data that we loaded from that file. So from that flat file that we moved into a data frame, this data now exists in this department test table. Now at this point you might be wondering, how useful is that? Well, depending on the data and what you're doing with it, this may be helpful if you need to insert data directly into the database. Perhaps you've been analyzing data from another data source and you now have cleaned this data to the point where you feel like it is useful to be a part of the larger data environment. From a machine learning environment or from a machine learning aspect, this is called preparing the data. This data may have been analyzed, you may have cleaned it up, you may have removed any of the dupes, it may have come from another source, and you now need to maybe join it or analyze it along with your existing data. So the data frame works as a useful aid in moving that data from that data frame, from that flat file directly into SQL Server. And now it's a part of the database. And because there's no constraints on this table, we can continue to append data over and over again to this table. Now, depending on the complexity of the table that you're doing the insertion into, you could certainly run into some common SQL errors if that's in place. However, if you don't have those type of things in place, you can continue to test and, excuse me, add data in. So let's think about what we've done so far. We've created a data frame, we've connected to the database, and we've inserted that data into a table that we've created. And we've been able to verify or validate that the data exists in the table without leaving this tool. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that that's a plus. I come from a database background and I've used many different client tools, but the ability for me to be able to switch between the two and not exit and have to bring up another tool or another screen to compare is a plus. So these are the two things that I wanted to share with you today. And I want to go back and let's talk about a few other things related to this environment. We're returning to our slide. So let's review some of the aspects that we've talked about so far. So the Azure Data Studio, there's a link that I'm displaying right now. We'll take you through setting that up on your machine. The ability to create and run a Python notebook as part of Azure Data Studio requires the installation of Python. This documentation will take you through adding the Python kernel to your Azure Data Studio installation in order for you to run Python code. One of the interesting aspects or the things that I did create prior to this presentation was to install SQL Server machine learning services in Windows. But do not think that that is the only place that it can exist. SQL Server machine learning services can also exist in Docker as well as on Linux. All of those instructions detailing the steps, including the commands that you'll need to run, are all involved or all available through Microsoft Docs. This particular steps that we went through to install Python into a data frame, insert a data frame into SQL table, is also documented through Microsoft Docs as well. Each one of the steps, including the script and the sample file that I showed you, is available on this document. So you might be considering some information regarding how do I get started or what do I need to do? So Microsoft Learn is an excellent way to build your path into learning about machine learning services with Microsoft. If you're not familiar with Python or you need to brush up, Intro to Python is an excellent way to do that. If you do have some introductory skills and you want to continue going forward, machine learning modules is a way to see how to do testing and prediction by building models with machine learning. Each one of these modules continues to build Intro to Azure Machine Learning, as well as building AI solutions with Azure Machine Learning. So from beginner to intermediate to advanced, you are able to build your skills and using all the tools that Microsoft provides. These are not at cost, and you can install this locally on your machine, or you can work within the Azure environment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation today. And now we got a few questions from the community that I'm going to share now. Just quickly, there were some questions about the Visual Studio Code. Can it be used for certain tasks? I think the question was relating to a certain part where basically the question is about the main differences between the Visual Studio Code and the Azure Data Studio. You can highlight some of the differences.
Oh, so interesting. So Azure Visual Studio Code, I think, is great for doing the development of code. So you could definitely write a lot of code within Visual Studio. But the beauty of Azure Data Studio is that you can see the deployment running live. So you could see, although you can make the connectivity to say GitHub and you can create content or you can publish your code, Azure Data Studio's primary purpose is to really interact with the data. So you're really kind of a first row perspective of using the data along with Azure Data Studio. You have the ability to run Python, SQL, and I believe also some Spark code as well. So I think that gives you a broader base of what you can run by using Azure Data Studio instead of Visual Studio Code.
And for someone who doesn't have that background in machine learning, they're just starting, is it difficult to learn? Any tips, any things that you would like to share to accelerate the journey?
I actually didn't start off with machine learning. I definitely have a stronger data SQL background, but I think there are some advantages to having that background because you're already familiar with data and the constructs around building SQL. If you're doing stored procedures or any of the technologies around SQL, those skill sets, I believe, can be migrated directly to machine learning. As you saw in the demonstration that we had, the Python code is actually manipulating SQL data. So there was a SQL statement embedded within the code that we were running with Python. I think the other aspect is just the readability of Python, that you could actually read it and see what it's doing. And so I feel like with that, along also with the examples that we have, because there's tons of quick starts and tutorials and examples that you can model your learn experience after that and then build on from there.
Great. And there were a couple of questions also on like the trial subscriptions. Is there anything for the machine learning services that you can guide us to?
Yes, so there isn't necessarily a trial for machine learning services. Microsoft, if you're building and you're not going through, so Azure itself, yes, it does have a trial, but if you wanted to set up machine learning services, if you follow the documentation for setting it up for Windows, Linux, or Docker, you are given the option of using SQL Express or Developer, and there's no cost to that. And adding machine learning services is an additional step after you've established your SQL environment.
All right, reading through the questions. Also, there are a few requests on sharing the link for today's presentation. So I'll get that from you and I'll share it with the community members as well. They would like to have access to it.
Oh, great. And like I said, the documentation for the presentation that I gave with all of the code is actually in Microsoft Docs under machine learning.
Sounds great. I'm leaving the floor open for more questions to come. If anyone from the community members has questions, please send them through. Right, I see a few coming. Okay, what's the minimum version for Windows operating system required to run Azure or machine learning services?
Well, you need to be able to run, it's a server, so you need to be able to run SQL Server on your Windows machine. So for example, I'm using Windows 10 and I do have SQL Server 2019 installed on it. So you should be able to use that. If you're using a version from Windows earlier than 10, you may not be able to run that. I'd have to actually look into that, but I know it does work on Windows 10 because that's the environment that I'm running it on now.
All right, waiting for a few questions to come. Feel free to ask.
Looks like there's a question about the slides. I'm not sure where they would post at.
I'll work with you on the slides and we'll get them a link to have access to it. For the community members, please make sure you're joining the meetup page here. I'm gonna paste the link. I'm gonna share the slides link there. Here. And one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to encourage individuals to try Azure Data Studio for running code, especially for connecting to SQL and being able to see the data that you're working with. I think the advantage to doing that is you get to see kind of a direct impact to any of the changes that you may be making to a data environment because you're able to bring up the database within the same tool. I know for me, that was a huge plus to not have to step out and go into another tool and be able to look at those basically almost side by side.
All right, I think we don't have more questions, so I would take over the screen share now and maybe share some of the Learn modules for people and community members to continue the journey and take. Right, just presenting. All right, so I'm sharing this link with the members on the Q&A. If you switch to that, you'll find the link. So basically, this is a Learn module where you can continue the journey, learn more about creating machine learning modules. There are so many modules and learning paths on Learn that will help you take things forward. And this was interesting for today's session to include. I would highly encourage you to take that module. And take things forward. And also, I would like to mention some of the upcoming workshops and sessions we're doing next week. So on Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday, we have sessions that we're driving here locally that you can benefit from. So basically, there is a session on Sunday on machine learning simplified for developers. So maybe you want to try machine learning, but you don't know, and you don't want to invest maybe a lot of time and in learning and in learning a new programming language and for a complicated API. So we will look at ML from a developer perspective. We'll be prototyping our solutions with the help of Model Builder, tweak it with elementary data science knowledge, and finally generate some code that you will use in your applications. So join us on Sunday for that session to learn more about the Model Builder and how you can use the .NET if you're coming with that background. And on Monday, we have a workshop on DevOps tools of trade. So from cloning GitHub repo to setting up an Azure pipeline, DevOps tools will be critical aspect for you in developing a scalable and professional software. So using the different services, you can plan smarter, collaborate better, and ship faster. And in this workshop, you will get an introduction to a number of different DevOps tools and documentation resources that will prepare you for the next large project. And on Wednesday, we have a session on getting started with Java 11 serverless functions. That will be with Rory Preddy. He's a cloud advocate, and we will be talking about Azure Portal, Azure CLI, Gradle, Maven tools. So join us to learn all about the new powerful features and how you can get started. And yeah, quick reminder to do the survey. This is our channel to understand more about how like what content you would actually love to see in the reactor. So there are some questions on which topics you would love to see more and so on. So please take a minute to do the survey. I pasted the link in the Q&A very first in the beginning. So you just go to aka.ms reactor survey and use the event ID for today's session. It's 10184, and provide us some feedback to plan future workshops on topics that you would love to see. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. This is a monthly curated newsletter that includes workshops from the different reactors locally and globally, and some global events as well. So that is on the last link, the reactor email sign up, and connect with us on social. MSFT Reactor is the Twitter handle. Join us on Meetup if you're not part of Abu Dhabi community yet. You definitely should not miss any of the coming sessions, and also join and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So I'll get the session soon on that channel, but until then, you will have around 16 hours after the stream ends today to replay the session and watch it again if you missed any part. So that's it. Thank you again for joining us today, and thanks for our speaker for taking the time to share their experience with our community. And that's it. Goodbye. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.